Russia has allies.
Oh yeah, lots of them.
People have been making this mistake, and that's why I think that the second phase is going to be different than anybody, including me, is expecting, simply because there's so many variables and so many possibilities.
Yes.
People forget that North Korea has the fourth largest army in the world. Uh, it would be very, very easy. For example, people are thinking in terms of, oh, well, in the second phase, um, what if China makes its move on Taiwan? And certainly there are some indications
Mm-hmm.
that that could be happening with the increased number of air sorties and all
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. But
But it's not necessarily that.
nobody's talking about Korea.
Yeah.
If the Russians and their allies want to make sure that the U.S. military is handicapped,
Oh yes.
then one of the multiple fronts
Mm-hmm.
that is going to be opened is going to be the North Korean South Korean
Yes.
border, or alternatively, just keeping that busy. And North Korea could afford to send 250,000 troops to Russia.
Could be.
Now, I'm pretty sure that the Russians don't want 250,000 half-starved but very well-armed North Koreans
Sure.
parading through Ukraine.
But
But
it's
it's
possible.
an option is the thing that people are forgetting.
It happened before. Hello everyone, this is Piero San Giorgio. I am in the lair of the Dark Lord. Theo, Vox Day, thank you very much for having me in your house.
Happy to have you.
So how is the writing going these days?
Actually, for once, extremely well. Um, I'm trying to get A Sea of Skulls done, the extended version. It's been about 7 years in the making, but I'm finally on the home stretch. I put myself on a very strict word budget, and have managed to hit it every day since I started. So we're going to be done, I calculate, by February 26th.
So writer to writer, what's your technique? What's your style of how you write?
Um, it's very chaotic and unprofessional. Um, I it tends to surprise people a bit because, as you know, my fiction, I write epic fantasy, and so the books run about 900 pages long. And but despite that, I still happen to be what they call a seat of the pants writer. Um, I don't do outlines. I don't really know what's going to happen per se. It's the exact opposite of a plot driven writer. Um, it was difficult. That's why it was difficult writing Quantum Mortis, A Man Disrupted, because that was a mystery. And with mysteries, you generally have to kind of plot out how it's going to go. Like your average Agatha Christie or classic murder mystery novel is very tightly plotted, which is why, of course, the characters tend to be uh, almost caricatures, because you can't allow too much room for the character development or for the characters to do something unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
So technique wise, what I like to do is flesh out the characters fully, which is why sometimes I'll write a short story or two about the character, so that I have a better idea of who they are, what their preferences and inclinations are. And then it's more about putting them in situations and allowing their character template to dictate the direction of events.
So not many notes.
No, although I have to admit, I now have notes, because one of the problems is, uh, when you wrote the first book 10 years ago,
Right.
you have no idea what somebody's name is,
Sure.
So for example, at the end of A Throne of Bones, just the cast of characters is, you know, 15, 20 pages long. And to make it worse, because I write fantasy, there's a lot of different words representing the different imaginary languages. So, for example, what do orcs call dwarves?
Mm.
They don't call them dwarves. So you have to maintain sort of a mini dictionary list
Sure.
of what the orcs call the dwarves, or how the dwarves swear when they stub their toes. It all adds to the verisimilitude of the feeling that the reader is in the fictional place that he's reading about.
Mm.
And so Tolkien, of course, was the ultimate master of this, because as a philologist or expert in languages,
Yes.
is that philologist?
Or linguist,
Yeah,
but for
anyhow,
sure.
he was beyond the master when it comes to that in writing. That's why his books are unforgettable and are the probably the greatest fantasy books that will ever be written, simply because the level of detail and verisimilitude he went into, I cannot imagine anyone ever managing to accomplish again. So
I first heard about you many years ago, not for your fiction, but actually for your essays.
Mm-hmm.
Was it Conservative? Was it well? That's Chernovik's book, but
no, Conservative.
Yeah, it's yours. It's yours. That's what I thought. And then, of course, SJWs always lie, and the second one always double down. You also write essays without notes, or they require a little bit research, or
they require research.
Yeah.
I usually have a pretty good amount of books and articles and just even paragraphs that I saw on the internet somewhere and bookmark. Usually the first thing that I do when I'm writing a book about a specific subject, like for example, The Irrational Atheist.
It's a good book.
One of the first things that I did was send my publisher a list of books that I needed in order to write it. And so the Encyclopedia of Wars, all of Richard Dawkins' books, all of Daniel Dennett's books. I didn't bother with all of Peter Hitchens' books, just the one on.
He's a good speaker, good public speaker.
Good public speaker, horrible dialectician. I mean,
I didn't read the books.
Yeah,
I didn't read his book, but I followed many of his conferences.
Well, the funniest thing about Peter Hitchens, who was a likable enough character. In fact, we exchanged a little bit of email after I wrote that book. I think he was perhaps just a little bit embarrassed to have been exposed that comprehensively.
Yeah.
Because what I demonstrated in the chapter on him in Irrational Atheist is he never actually, at any point in time, presented an argument in God is not great. He used his rhetorical skills from his public appearances, where he would say something, or he'd point out something, and then state how ridiculous it was.
Yeah.
In his opinion. And that was the case.
Yeah, it's an opinion. It's not. It's the same with Dawkins. He's probably a brilliant scientist, but fanatic, needlessly fanatic.
Ex-fanatic.
I've not followed for a long time.
Dawkins is, I believe, deeply regretting his participation in the destruction of Western Christian culture, because he believed...
He was a late arrival on that fight.
Well, yeah, but he believed, I think sincerely, that science and secularism was going to deliver this rational, sexy science fiction society that we've been promised by the science fiction writers since the 1950s.
We've seen the result. Good books, though. Dawkins writes good books. I read most of them. They're very interesting.
Dawkins is a good writer. The thing that it's a bit ironic that he's given credit for being this polemicist.
Yeah, because the books are very balanced and very retenu in French. I don't know how you say in English, but very
well, they're
mild in a way.
They're entertaining. They are moderate.
Yeah, moderate.
And they present a nice picture. The problem with Dawkins is that number one, he trusts the wrong people. Like
possibly.
He repeatedly talks about, or he repeatedly repeats the cases presented by Sam Harris, which is a disaster because Sam Harris is one of the sloppiest thinkers you can even possibly imagine.
I have to agree with that. Yes,
but he, like Hitchens,
that's more in his public appearance, not in the books.
No, in the books.
I didn't remember. Maybe recent ones.
He repeatedly talks about how convinced he is by Sam Harris's red state argument.
I don't remember that, but okay.
Yeah, which was total nonsense. Harris, despite being an American, forgot that there's a much more granular area in the United States called the county.
Yes.
And so just simply by looking at the county data, it completely proved the complete opposite of what his state theory was claiming.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example. But Dawkins, the bigger problem with Dawkins is that he's not that smart. He's not stupid, but he's nowhere near as smart as he thinks he is. And so he makes bad mistakes. Like he tried to prove evolution through a simple algorithm and failed to understand that it didn't account for the single most important element that he was trying to prove. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, any computer programmer who looked at that, you didn't have to be a religious to look at that and realize it was totally absurd.
Yeah. Harris, not Harris. Yeah, Harris. I didn't think he was very good with his debate with Peterson, which says a lot.
If you can't beat the smart boy in an argument, I mean, you're pretty hopeless.
No, I like Peterson for reasons that, in fact, are shown. As you said, he's also an ex. I think he's repenting in a way, psychologically, about a lot of things he's said before, which were a bit light or not very deep and anyways, that's not the topic of. I didn't want to go there, but
we can go there. I've written an entire book on Jordan Peterson called Jordanetics. So if we don't need to go into it now, but let's just say.
Honestly, I thought you were a bit harsh in this book, but fundamentally you were right. And indeed, I think we're not over with the Russian. You call these ups and downs of Mr. Peterson, because I think he's deeply a good man. That's my opinion. I think he's trying to do good. Maybe I'm not convincing you there, but he went off track on so many topics.
I think that,
and he's way too mild in helping people out. I'm not sure he's helping people the way he thinks he is.
I think Jordan Peterson is a deeply, deeply broken man.
Oh, broken? For sure.
I think that there is, I think there are indications that he was probably abused in various ways as a child.
Possibly.
And I'm deeply, let's say, deeply concerned about the way that he kept getting brought in to sort of babble away certain pedophile situations in Canada. And so that's why I think that I think that we don't know how deep that particular rabbit hole goes. And there's some indications based on his own writings, and also based on some of his more unsavory and questionable historical connections, that it might. I'm not saying it will, and I'm not saying that there's necessarily any fire under the smoke. I think, to be honest, I think Peterson is much more sinned against than sinning. But
yeah, I would say so. I would say
that
that's also a feeling I have when I read him or listen to him.
But I would say that it's a massive, massive mistake for anyone to look to someone that broken for guidance. I do think and I think part of his appeal is that I think that he is somebody who is probably fundamentally well intentioned.
Yeah.
But we all know where the road of good intentions.
Speaking of
can
good
go.
intentions, we have here behind an incredible collection of the amazing books that you are publishing. Incredibly nicely bound, very high quality books. Hopefully soon they will come out in French as well. We are working on that.
Well, and just today I'm actually picking up the keys for the local bindery. And so people are a little bit concerned because I'm pleased to say that I now have a guillotine. An actual
Could be useful in the next few years.
Could be useful, but it's for the
Just
books.
reform of justice.
It's for the books.
It's for the books.
Not the politicians. But
One thing at a time.
but the it's actually remarkable that we've had the support and the interest. When we first, I came up with the idea because I love the Franklin Library books.
Mm-hmm.
My wife, back when we were first married, gave me a copy of Umberto Eco's Foucault's Pendulum from Franklin Library. It's beautiful, and plus being one of my favorite books.
Yeah, it's a very complex book, and it's amazing.
How I feel about Eco.
Yeah. It's from he's like 20 kilometers from my hometown in Italy.
I do.
Alessandria.
I actually I've had the opportunity to actually meet him and talk to him twice. That was
in Alessandria or in
no. Once was in St. Paul, or actually in Minneapolis.
Okay.
I spent the whole day with him, in fact, and then the other time was in Milano.
You sound like a warm person as well.
He's a wonderful, or he was a wonderful man. Great teacher, but he also was someone who was, there was definitely intellectual steel under the cuddly exterior. Which you may identify
even
with.
the short stories he wrote about the one about the salmon in the fridge.
Right.
Amazing way to get thoughts across.
Well, what was interesting to me was that I thought that he was. I did the interview with him, and it was a great interview, and the St. Paul Pioneer Press ran it, and he was interesting though because he was almost harsh, like at one point was literally shouting at me saying, I made the mistake of asking about the blind monk being the villain
in the name of the rose.
Exactly.
The rose, yeah.
And so he said, "Why do you think he is the villain? He is not the villain. He is the hero." And this is the person who committed the murders.
Yeah, but he's saving the books.
I thought that was a reasonable, but
plot line, yes.
But what, and this was very important. In fact, looking back on it, this was probably a fundamental foundation of my writing. Is that he said, he said, from the point of view of the reader, you would see him as the villain, but his internal motivations make him one of the heroes. He's like, he is doing his best to do what is right in his eyes. And so, ever since, I've always attempted to make sure that I create characters as they see themselves, not as the reader is expected to see them. And so that allows you to create characters that are much more credible, that are much more interesting, and also much more complex, because even though morality is black and white, good and evil are black and white, but humans come in shades of gray because we all have evil in us and we all have the potential for good in us.
And the biases we have makes very few people think of themselves as evil. Even the ones who commit heinous crimes, they either see them as for the greater good, which is the worst thing you can see in the left.
That's the rational evil.
Yeah.
But then most people because of their own psychological issues, problems, the faulty wiring in their brain, or the self justification of the narcissist allows them to believe in the delusion
Oh yes.
that what they're doing is right, even if it's quite obviously not by any moral standard.
Yeah. And then there is the category of people, and I interviewed a mafia boss in Naples once, where he was saying, "Sure, I've kind of organized the killing of such and such a person, but I also use my money to create, schools, orphanages, and things like that. So the good I'm doing is compensating the bad I'm doing, and
Which under some moral standards is not only acceptable, it's correct. I mean, as an evangelical Christian, I would reject that thinking.
Me too,
But
for sure.
and many people would, but you can't. I mean, as they said in the movie, at least it's an ethos.
So that gives me the appropriate transition to talk about one of the great is it evil, is it goods in history, which is war. War makes a lot of advances and changes the world for good and for bad, depends. And we're in the middle of one right now.
We are.
It's been almost a year. Some say almost a decade. Some say it's much longer than that. What's last time we recorded, we talked about the very strange evolution of and we tried to give some rationale. I think we were right on the money. Our analysis were actually good.
I think we thought Russia was going to push a little further, a little harder.
Could be,
but
it would also, and which is we're recording this just after parts of the defensive lines of Ukraine in the central part of the front have been smashed, with high casualties for Ukraine, unfortunately, because I don't rejoice for the death of these young and old men, and possibly civilians as well, who are brought to die for an interest which is not theirs. And this saddens me, because they are our brothers, they are our kin, they are humans that are close to us, and yet they have to fight against my other brothers, the Russians, and cousins, part of the Russian army, which are from the many nationalities that Russia has. But anyway, let's analyze. What's your point of view of how is the situation now? The strategies. I have a lot of what's the word? Not disappointments, disagreements on how Russia is, but also some agreements on how Russia is waging the war. And who am I to say this anyway? But how do you see also the situation moving forward?
Well, I think that we are rapidly approaching what will be eventually seen as the second phase of World War III. Some of the things that we talked about, both you and I, the last time, as well as with some other folks that we've known since a year ago, it's clarified opinions quite a bit. Back in March of 2022, it was still possible to believe that this was a war between Russia and Ukraine over the borderlands.
Yeah, this is why it was obvious that
the Donbass.
Russia would win quickly.
Well, but not only that, it was credible that was the situation.
Yeah.
Now, I very firmly and very repeatedly pointed out that this was not a war between Russia and Ukraine, that this was a war between Russia and NATO.
Yes. Now it's obvious.
Now everybody knows that. Everybody accepts that. And of course, the media pretends that they never said anything else.
Yeah,
as they do.
Who listens to media anyway?
Right. But now I believe that we're on the verge of the next stage, which is the expansion of the war into the Pacific. Now, it's very, very clear. In fact, I just read a 165-page report by a U.S. military think tank explaining that the U.S. can win the war and successfully defend Taiwan from China, um, which might be superficially convincing if you don't read the assumptions that are brought in, which is that Russia will not get involved at all in any way. No one will get involved in any way, and the U.S. will successfully use various missiles and weapon systems that it doesn't have yet.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also been reports that Australia is gearing up for a major war, which means China, in 2 to 3 years. I personally don't think that that's likely to happen. I suspect, just on the basis of historical war making, that the next stage is probably going to be China taking aggressive action in coordination with the Russian offensive that's expected in Ukraine.
That could be interesting.
Because it's very clear that NATO is fighting the war, is literally fighting the war. They're not just supplying money, they're not just supplying weapons. I mean, and the amount of money and weaponry that they have supplied is many multiples of the entire Ukrainian defense budget.
Of course.
And so if you look at what's being supplied, at what's being provided, and now you're looking at the fact that the Ukrainian military barely exists in its own right anymore.
Yeah.
They're down to the old, what did the Germans call them? The stomach, the youth and the stomach battalions.
Yes.
And so they're bringing in their last vestiges of viable troops, which are poorly trained militia. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the foreign mercenaries that they report are actually just U.S. troops.
They are there.
And
British, so, Polish.
Yeah, well, and the foreign mercenaries are mostly U.S., but they're also some European forces, very very small. But then the Polish forces have actually entered Ukraine openly, and so you've got this melange of the surviving Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian militia, effectively, the U.S. forces, and then the Polish forces. And this is not something that's going to stand up to any major Russian offensive. And as you know from your World War II history, the Russians like to surprise people with the size of their offensives.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect that if and when the Russians decide to launch such an offensive, it's going to provide a sort of shock and awe of its own to the Western media, because I don't think people are prepared for the size of it.
As we know, there's you always analyze conflicts and wars on different levels. You have, of course, and that's where a lot of media ends up being focused because it's more sexy, and even people who comment, there's the tactical element. The tactical being the small unit tactics, the equipment, the material. Here, by the way, you see that Ukraine is becoming a sort of garbage dumping ground for all the old equipment of
Right.
NATO countries. France has sent some very great at the time, and for operations in Africa especially, wheeled tanks, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Probably cannot even call them tanks, the AMX-10, which have no purpose whatsoever and will be unable to be maintained, and with difficult supply problems for ammunition. Germany is trying to send some good old tanks as well, but piecemeal, and which require training, and the bigger, for example, the bigger Leopard tanks or the American tanks cannot cross most of the bridges, which are made during the Soviet times,
Right.
to withstand 50-ton tanks, which the Soviets had, and not the 60 to 70-tons tanks.
Or the 80-ton Abrams.
Exactly. So tactics is one thing, and you can discuss whether anti-tank tactics from one side is better than the other, but tactics are clearly also you have to add the quantity to that.
Mm-hmm.
You can have say World War II Germany being probably the best unit tactics of all belligerent,
Mhm.
and yet they ended up being completely smashed, crushed by the size and the improving tactics of both the Western allies and especially the Eastern Front's Soviet Red Army. Then you have the operational element. This is becoming much more interesting because in the operational element, you do factor the attrition rates, the ability to perform offensive, and objectives in the field that make sense. For example, last time we talked, Russia had just retreated from some farmland, and people were, and we were also a bit worried, not worried, but concerned about what does that mean, and it meant nothing.
Oh,
better position than.
Let me at least correct you on that. I was never.
Okay.
I always thought that that was the correct thing to do because they basically had a bunch of militia there.
Yeah.
And they were just going to get overrun. So what they did is they saved the lives of their troops.
Yeah.
I mean, people have a, you know, maybe it helps to play some war games now and then to better understand these things. But winning a war is not about winning every battle, and it's also not about retaining territory. The most important thing is to preserve your resources.
Yes.
That's why a general who gets half his troops killed every time he takes an objective is considered to be a terrible general.
Yes.
Anybody can order troops into the meat grinder and overwhelm an enemy force. Like Sun Tzu says, the perfect general is one who manages to win the battle without even fighting.
Yes.
And so what the Russians accomplished there was to essentially eliminate a lot of Ukrainian forces while completely preserving all of their own. That's not a defeat.
Yeah, the kill ratio is staggering, as we see now. Even the admitted deaths from Ukraine.
It's the rate
it's huge.
The rate is higher than the Israeli Arab.
Yes.
The historical Israeli Arab
Yes.
rate, which is considered to be, nearly unprecedented.
Yeah.
And so
it's very sad in a way, but it also shows where at least the operational element is winning, because if you're bleeding white the enemy, then the offensive is also much easier once you want to mop it up.
Exactly. And if they're dumb enough to keep coming at you instead of staying in defensive positions, then you let them. I mean, there's absolutely no point. A lot of people have been frustrated that, well, how come Russia hasn't done more? Why are things taking so long? Et cetera, et cetera. And obviously, the main reason is because all of the pre-war calculations were based on what Ukraine actually had.
Yes.
What we're seeing is many multiples of what Ukraine actually had in terms of weaponry, and even to a lesser extent in terms of personnel because of the foreign personnel who are there.
Yes.
And so why should the Russians risk a single Russian soldier life if they can continue to bleed the enemy without making a move?
This is why they send trained jail inmates for becoming mercenaries rather than, Russian boys and of 20s, of the elite units. And now that so many have been exposed to fighting and brought back and trained the new units of the mobilization, they mobilized quite a lot, and they announced before Christmas the expansion by 50% of the ground forces, which is huge.
Well, and the other thing that people are failing to keep in mind is that Russia has allies.
Oh yeah, lots of them.
I mean, people have been making this mistake, and that's why I think that the second phase is going to be different than anybody, including me, is expecting, simply because there's so many variables and so many possibilities.
Yes.
People forget that North Korea has the fourth largest army in the world. It would be very, very easy. For example, people are thinking in terms of, oh, well, in the second phase, what if China makes its move on Taiwan? And certainly there are some indications that could be happening with the increased number of air sorties and all that kind of stuff. But
but it's not necessarily that.
Nobody's talking about Korea.
Yeah.
If the Russians and their allies want to make sure that the U.S. military is handicapped,
Oh yes.
then one of the multiple fronts
Mhm.
that is going to be opened is going to be the North Korean South Korean
Yes.
border, or alternatively, just keeping that busy. And North Korea could afford to send 250,000 troops to Russia.
Could be.
Now, I'm pretty sure that the Russians don't want 250,000 half-starved but very well-armed North Koreans
Sure.
parading through Ukraine.
But,
But
it's
it's
possible.
But it's an option is the thing that people are forgetting.
It happened before the other way. The Chinese went into Korea big time.
Exactly. And so it's a huge mistake for people to simply look at the static situation of who's actively involved now
Yeah.
and assume that it's going to stay that way, because that's never been the case in these large-scale global wars.
And as we go from operational, which requires also the logistics, and we're going to reach that, you have to move up to the strategy. And the strategy is where we don't really know what we can perceive quite a lot of what people want, but it's always hard to know for sure because what they say is not necessarily what they want to do.
We have no idea what their objectives
Exactly.
are. I mean, Putin talks about the denazification of Europe. I don't even know what that means. I mean, I can.
Well, if you listen to the left, we're all Nazis anyway, so.
Yeah,
but we're not.
No, but we're Nazis because we support Russia.
Exactly,
something ridiculous like that. But the point is that only Putin and his generals know exactly what their objectives are, and their objectives tend to change over time.
Yeah.
I don't think that at the beginning in December 1941, I'm pretty sure that there was no one, including Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was thinking, okay, our objective is to drop an atomic weapon on Nagasaki.
Of course not.
I mean, that wasn't even.
They weren't sure it would work anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
At the time.
And so objectives change.
Yes.
And plans change, and also, the thing that I think a lot of people today don't seem to be able to grasp is that the existence of a plan is distinct from the eventual success or failure of that plan.
Yes.
Which is a little bit ironic when you consider that, everyone from Napoleon to Mike Tyson understand that, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So it's not that Zelensky has plans, Putin has plans.
I have plans.
The clowns that are funding the Zelensky regime have plans.
Oh yes.
But and all of these things are coming together in this massive, bloody mix, and what comes out of it is not going to be completely according to anyone's plan.
Mm-hmm. Because to make sure plan and the strategy works, and this is where I really find it fascinating to study, and is the political and industrial complex that is behind that enables the carrying out of the plans, whichever it is.
Which is usually going to be the determinative factor in a struggle of this gravity. It's been obvious, and I've been trying to explain this to, some of my Ukrainian friends, to other people who don't pay any attention to the history of war, even really, great military analysts like Martin Van Creveld.
Mm-hmm.
None of them seem to grasp that the industrial capacity is determinative.
Absolutely.
And I mean, there was no way that Germany or Japan were ever going to win those wars. And it was very, very easy to see because the Western powers, the combined industrial capacity of the Western powers, was producing weapons faster than Germany or Japan could destroy them.
Of course, which is something that, whatever we can say on his flaws, Churchill understood that very well. This is why he was ready to sacrifice so many humans, because he knew that once the US was in, that was a done deal.
Right, and
There's no way Germany or Japan could even dream of doing anything.
exactly. There's no chance. And also, by the same token, now if you look at the
US at the time, not today.
Yes.
Today is different.
exactly, and you've got a different population,
Yes, very much so.
which is way less productive than the American population of the 1940s.
Oh yeah.
Everything,
Let alone the 50s or the 60s,
Yeah,
which were the highest point of US productivity, probably.
yeah, exactly. And also it didn't hurt that they had the only factories in the entire world that
Yes,
hadn't
of
been
course,
destroyed.
of course.
You had pretty much a monopoly there. But even accounting for that unique period, the white American workforce,
Yes.
almost largely male, largely almost entirely European,
Yeah.
was a very, very different, higher capacity workforce than the United States has today.
And even the deep state of the time was honest and hardworking. It had values and morals.
I don't know that I would go that far, but I will say that at least the deep state of the time was not like third generation inbred, intellectually mediocre.
Okay.
Um,
Let's agree on that.
yeah, they were much more capable. Let's put it
Oh
that
yes,
way.
yes.
And so
yes.
so now, you've
Which
got
is something we mentioned during our last chat.
Yeah, but now when you look at the combined industrial capacity of Russia, of China,
Mhm.
and the countries that are aligning with them, such as India and India,
Iran, South Africa,
ex-
maybe Brazil.
Well, exactly. I mean, South Africa, I'm pretty sure their industrial capacity.
No,
is
it's small.
negligible.
It's
But-
not. It's not
but-
zero, but it's small.
But the point is that it
Had lots of resources, though.
absolutely dwarfs
Yes.
the industrial capacity of the U.S. and Europe, and Germany is starving. Is committing industrial suicide
Yes.
with its energy policies.
Yeah, because GDP is a very wrong way to calculate how countries fare in a war.
No, I mean, obviously you know a lot about it. I'm an economist by training myself, and saying that the United States has a much greater military capacity because the dollar GDP is greater is nuts.
It's
I mean,
nuts.
it's like saying that, well, I can beat you in a fight because I have more monopoly dollars. I mean, no.
That's a good analogy.
It
Or
doesn't even factor
Or when
in.
the media was saying at the beginning, "Oh, Russia has the GDP of Spain." No, it doesn't. First of all, and second of all, it's not the same. It's not the same stuff that they do.
Right. I mean, even if you, it's false even by economic standards, because even mainstream neo-Keynesian economists will admit that if you're going to compare one economy to another, you can't do it in dollar GDP. You have to do it in PPP.
Exactly.
equivalent.
At least that.
But
even that
that's
is not
nonsense.
correct. Yes.
Even that's total
Even
nonsense.
that is not correct.
Because and I don't know, when I was younger, when I was never a Keynesian.
Mhm.
I studied it, I mastered it because that's what you had to even
Sure.
make sense of the numbers. You had to learn it. I was much more of the Austrian school, but
Same.
and at the time I used to roll my eyes at people that wanted to come up with these other calculations of economic well-being, based on units of happiness, or what was there's some term they used for it. It's just stupid, but they're units of happiness,
There was the McDonald's power purchasing.
The Big Mac index.
Big Mac index.
And
yes.
then there was also which I think that you actually have done some work on. There was the idea of measuring it through energy output or energy consumption. And I used to just think that
Which
was
is also misleading, because in the US you consume a lot of energy.
sure, but
You don't produce much
but I thought all that stuff was total nonsense at the time. But it
per
isn't.
capita.
It isn't total nonsense. It's just equally futile.
Yeah.
But it's futile for the same reason that using the dollar as a measure
Yes.
is futile. I mean, at least in the case of oil, like it's like substantial. But
To give an example, we just checked the numbers. Britain is saying or planning to send to Ukraine some very heavy and some of the Challenger 2 tanks.
yes,
We just checked. What's the production?
the total production from 1993 to 2002
Hmm.
is 456. And that means, and the next Challenger 3
Hmm.
is scheduled to begin production, and you know they're not going to begin on time,
No.
but it's scheduled to begin production in 2027. So
So where's the expertise? Where's the people who have knowledge on
where's
how you
the,
make?
no, they haven't produced any tanks in 25 years.
Yeah.
I mean,
Amazing.
I mean, what we didn't realize in looking at the actual military production capacity is that the tank capacity production of Britain is zero.
I was thinking it was like 20. Remember, I saw. Is it 20 per year? It's zero.
It's zero. And not only that, it has been zero.
They probably keep the
It's been zero since 2002.
yeah. They probably keep the factory to refurbish damaged or tanks, and the ones that are damaged in the whatever exercise or in
Oh,
Iraq, they bring them back.
I wouldn't even assume that, because with the Tony Blair government, they might have, and the whole peace dividend, they might have said, oh, well, you know, we don't need to fix these anymore. We've already got them. They'll be fine.
Maybe
No one's gonna
cannibalize whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's and probably France has a little bit more export industry, so they probably have some production still going on because they produce the Leclerc. Germany, I don't know if they produce Leopard 2 at this point anymore, but comparing this to full-scale production in China and Russia,
it makes the imbalance of industrial productivity in World War II look fair.
and
I mean, it's
for sure.
it is more clear that the U.S. and the NATO satrapies, because you can't call them allies. I mean,
No,
they have no
it's-
choice.
Yeah.
The U.S. and the NATO countries are at a bigger disadvantage from a logistical point of view
Ever.
than Germany and Japan were back in World
Of
War
course. And if you compare that to the capacity, for example, Russia has a long tradition since the Soviet times, since the World War II times, to rebuild and refurbish whatever damaged or destroyed equipment they have, because it's
Right.
a way to save. And their industries have been working even through the very dark and difficult 90s. They never stopped. And for all the flaws, there are flaws of both the equipment, the tactics, the operational that they have, because they have to, you have to plan the operational plans with the equipment and tactics that you have, which they have a lot of legacy stuff from the old Soviet times, and some of it is really bad equipment because it was developed in the 60s and 70s
by communists.
by communists, and also because Russians are not a stupid people, with the constraint and the objectives of the times, which are completely different from what they are now. But as Donald Rumsfeld would say, you go to war with the army you have.
Right. And there's also a saying in military circles, which is that quantity is a quality of its own, which was proved by the Sherman versus the Panther.
So the experience, the capacity, the industrial capacity, and to be fair, the US still has some good capacity in the Navy, but it's declining very fast because you cannot train people on LGBT sensitivity and be efficient at war at the same time. You have to do a bit of both, and
also, as they discovered, if you put a woman in charge as the captain and put another woman as her executive officer, XO, and then they decide they don't like each other and they don't talk to each other, you might end up with a warship that is as likely to crash into a another
That-
ship
that
or,
did happen.
or a harbor. I mean, this
This
literally
this
happened.
this happened. I think there was a helicopter carrier that actually burned because one of the officers, a female officer, was actually sleeping with a probably young and hunky sailor, and then that sailor discovered that she was also sleeping with another male officer, and so he burned the ship in San Diego Harbor. So a few $1 billion of expenses just because,
as you do.
as you do, because as they used to do in the Navy long time ago, women and rabbits were a sign of bad luck in ships.
Right.
Rabbits for obvious reasons, and so yeah,
At least the rabbits weren't sinking ships.
well, they were eating the ropes, but certainly the it was a big sign of bad luck, the rabbits in old time navies, and still is by tradition. But certainly then you have the motivation aspects, and
Right.
even if you take because okay, certainly wars have a lot more drones, a lot of pilotless equipment. You still need the mindset, and you need the physical aptitudes, but the willpower. And if you look at, let's say you have a draft tomorrow where all the youth of Europe has to go to fight, no one will go.
Well, not only that, I think that would probably spark a revolution because I mean, seriously, who would you rather fight? The pedos that are in charge,
Yeah,
or the clowns and the trannies that are trying to draft you, or the Sino-Russian military machine.
and that's
I
even
mean, your odds are much better against the clowns.
Sure, if you have and that's even if you have a conscience that this is what's happening. But most people in most countries, first of all, they're heterogeneous. There's people say, well, I'm a Muslim, why should I fight for the Crusaders? And the other guy will say, well, I'm Chinese, and why should I fight for? And besides, I have my orders. All this is a mess.
Right.
But also the youth. First of all, they're physically unfit, most of them, to do anything besides going up from their PlayStation or whatever they're doing on the internet. But they don't care. They have no clue. And there is no even the enforcement. And even if you would draft hundreds of thousands of people, and let alone millions, what do you do with them? There's no weapons. There's no uniforms. There's no training facilities. There's no cadre. There's nothing. We have destroyed this over the last 40 years, 30 years. So there's just the physical impossibility to do anything. And I wonder, don't they know that? Or they're just so clueless?
Well, I had an interesting conversation with a guy who, works in, let's say, pretty high level circles that are aware of these things, and some of which are responsible for some of these things. And he told me that it would be impossible to exaggerate the degree to which they engage in very short-term thinking.
Obviously.
When he said if you're he said if you think that there is some sort of like clever master plan behind any of this stuff, he said, I can assure you there isn't. He said the people in the circles in which he runs, he said, were astonished by Russia even launching the invasion. The idea that maybe that having Russia destroy Western Europe or something, he said that wasn't even believed to be a possibility. And I don't mean a possibility in terms of motivation, a possibility in terms of it being Russia having the capability to do that. Now we're seeing very clearly that the BRICS nations, or BRICSia nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, etc. They have the ability to dictate what the future is going to be.
Absolutely, and this is what matters.
And they have different objectives. But the one thing that they all have in common is they do not want to submit to Clown World.
Exactly.
you know.
Absolutely. And this is the fundamental. And I'm going to have a debate. I'll have to be the devil's advocate in a way, but I don't think I will be very much.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, on this. And you know, if you base your life and the way you, or the things you should do or you think you must do on ethics,
Mhm.
at least that, and whether they're rational or brought by a set of religious belief, whatever, if you are, if by any ways you look at it, you just cannot stand with the West. It, as you say, the clown world. First of all, it's doomed to fail in an exceedingly fast and it's accelerating way.
Mhm.
But it's just against anthropology and any human soul and or rational even approach. It just doesn't work, and
Well,
no
but
one wants it.
It denies science. It denies religion. It denies reality.
Common sense.
It denies observation. I mean, it's a literally insane, you know, it's an insane pseudo philosophy. Obviously, as a Christian, I know damn well where it comes from.
Of course,
know?
yes.
But whether you believe in that sort of thing or not, um, more and more people are beginning to, just because the sheer insanity of it prevents, you know, any other conclusion, because it's just such, it's so utterly evil, and it's so utterly insane from every rational human perspective
Yes.
that you know, I've talked to a number of people that are just like, I didn't believe in evil before,
Yeah.
but I don't have any choice because of what I'm seeing from Clown World.
I'm part of those people for sure, and even people which I used to know and didn't frequent for obvious reasons who were from the left, but more like the working class left. They have completely abandoned this crazy clown world as well, and they're coming to the common sense people. And to add on what you said, you know, I met a few high level economics. One was Stiglitz, Nobel Prize. They have no clue. For example, he had the economic perspective for 2030, which was stellar growth, and I said, but how do you find the energy to make your models work? And he said, oh, energy is a given.
Right.
Okay, well, give me infinite energy, and I'll make you any model you want. I'll go to the stars and to colonize the universe. It's a 5-year-old level of consciousness from a Nobel economic Nobel Prize, which says a lot.
Right.
And also the billionaires I used to work with, for example, they have zero, but probably less than zero knowledge of the military aspects of the world. So they, such as you and I have studied by working through history books and war games, which is interesting simulation, as we discussed last time. So because they have no knowledge, even if there is a cabal of some billionaires who want to influence politicians to change the world to their will, yeah, but the reality includes, of course, energy, but also includes military capacity. And if they have this bizarre idea that Russia is just a bunch of peasants who don't know how to fight, and they don't win all the wars, for sure, Russia in history, they sometimes lose. But if they have this idea that, oh yeah, Russia is nothing because they still have this 1994 vision of the Soviet army completely smashed after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they're completely wrong. So of course, if there is even a cabal, it's based on such nonsense data and some irrational thought that the objectives that are given to whoever executes, and I agree, completely in a moronic way and without competence, it multiplies the capacity to go completely wrong by factors that are very high.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the movie Spawn, where these two total stoner losers decide to summon the devil, and this toad-like demon turns to the devil and says, why do we have all the morons? And you kind of get the feeling that that must be how the devils are talking about the clown world elite today, because everything they're doing looks, at least from the outside, totally insane. Like like even the stuff like, you know, Klaus Schwab and the whole like, you will own nothing and you will eat the bugs and you will be happy. It's like,
Not really.
but no, but let's say for the sake of argument, yes, that's exactly how it's going to work. What do you think your life is going to be like, Hans?
Yeah.
You know, if you got a bunch of people that are sitting around like this in a VR thing all the time and eating crickets, you know, those are going to be your sex slaves.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to be totally useless for you.
Exactly.
Like the when you look at their idea of winning, it's not winning. Their
No,
idea of
it
winning is worse than losing.
Yeah, it
And-
is. It is completely the case that even the world that enables that wealth or that concentration of power is based on economic principles and rules that they're destroying.
Exactly, and you know, people used to sometimes, when I was first criticizing Jordan Peterson, this is when he was, you know, flying high, and he was like the number one public intellectual in the world, the number one best-selling author, and all this sort of thing. And so some people were saying, "Oh, well, you're just criticizing him because you're jealous." And
Not really.
I said at the time, first of all, you have no idea how I live, and secondly, no.
No,
Yeah,
knowing your life
just-
and what I see from Mr. Peterson's life,
But you know, this is.
I don't think you're jealous.
And this is before he, you know, was like breaking down, crying on stage every
Yeah.
night. Before he got, you know, addicted to definitely not meth and had to be put in a coma. And I mean, you know, you're looking at it going.
Yeah.
You look at it and you're like, do you people not see
Yeah,
that this is that is not success?
it's not.
That
it's
is not winning. And the thing is that these you even look at the ticket taking rock stars or Hollywood actresses, and
Which
stuff.
you know that
And
you
they're-
know that world for sure.
And you look at the screwed up children with the tattoos on their faces and the you know, all the divorces and the horrific overdosing on this and you're like, look, people, that's not success. That's what crazy people tell you success is.
Yeah.
And I think that we're seeing that same basic principle throughout
It's
the
slow
entire
death,
West.
slow death, and in a comfortable environment, but it's torture. It's torture for sure.
Well, yeah, because you look at them and they're not happy. They're not. You don't look at, you know, your average strung out rock star going, hey, he looks healthy.
Yeah, I'm glad I have a sense of humor, because being a guy who's a bit obsessed by efficiency in life, all of this is such a big waste, waste of people, waste of time, waste of resources. We should have been colonizing Alpha Centauri by now, for not all these stupid actions in the last 40 years. And it is really wasteful, because there's one thing that doesn't come back is time, and possibly some of the resources we're burning. You know, energy is expensive now. It's not as easy as it was in the 40s, the 50s. And that energy burned or wasted for, on one side, you know, getting the taint for young people to have their hair blue, just as much as having strawberries in the winter, or having the war machine producing 20 tanks per year, or 2,000.
Hey, it's perfectly efficient for them to produce 0 tanks per year.
Oh yeah, it's for sure.
That can they can maintain that rate indefinitely.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's true. The margin is the
Go ahead, folks. Check the math.
Yeah, don't divide by zero though. And such a waste is. But on the other hand, I write books about the collapse of the economy, about the collapse of civilization, and why we need to rebuild better after. So I cannot really complain. It's just pitiful that it's so wasteful.
Oh, it is. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we started Castelia Library, was because we wanted books that are going to survive 200 years, because it's possible they like you said,
It's possible we are not printing books in the next 200 years.
Exactly. And so it's in fact one of the things that we're actually planning to buy, in addition to all our fancy modern machines and my beloved guillotine, is that we're going to get some of the old presses, just so that if need be, we can still print stuff.
Oh, yeah, no, it's important,
because we can't count on the massive digital printers like Ingram runs and he does the beautiful print on demand stuff. I mean, there's so much amazingly cool technology, but it all rests on such a fragile foundation that we can't assume that it's going to be there. It might be there. For example, when we talked last time, we were concerned about the energy and electricity situation. Turned out, not a problem.
So far, it's okay.
The winter's been mild.
So far,
I mean, I've barely, I'm sure you have it too, but I've barely touched my now massive firewood stocks.
Yeah, I did fire only twice.
I may be good for the next 20 years, which would be nice.
Could be. That's true. That's true. You just wear more sweaters, but I haven't put. I just made twice the fire this winter for around Christmas. So, maybe. But then.
But it's good.
In the US, it was not the case.
Those are good non-problems to have.
Yes.
And it's always best to be more or less prepared.
Yes.
And not need it than to not be prepared and not have it if it turns out to be necessary.
So to close on today's thoughts, how do you see 2023 going?
Well, I think that we're probably going to see. I mean, there's two outcomes. One is just the linear trend, which is
downwards.
Well, no, but yeah, slightly backwards in the West. Russia, the Ukrainian regime falls. Russia takes over half the territory, and the West continues bumbling along under the clown rule.
Yeah, that's a possible scenario.
And the reason it's impossible to say, oh, I really think this is going to happen, is because it really depends upon what Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin decide. If they've decided, and I suspect they have, if they've decided to go ahead and take their shot to make their move, then we're going to see, probably some level of economic chaos. We're going to see panic among the ruling elite. We're probably going to see the European Union start to break apart. I mean, actually, technically, it's already started to break apart. But I think that if China and Russia do make a joint move to really launch the second phase of the war, then I think we're going to start seeing government changes in Europe. I think we're going to see more repression in the United States, and I think that we'll see the European Union actually begin to fracture with countries like Italy and Hungary leaving it. It's going to be really interesting to see how Russia decides to support what will end up being, call it a pro-Brexia movement throughout the West.
Southeast, Greece, Italy, Hungary.
Well, everywhere, including in
Serbia.
Including in Germany.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody who's even
sure.
remotely sane or self-interested support. And in fact, even people that are sincere, brainwashed, quadruply vaccinated, loyal servants of clown world have no desire to fight Russia.
Oh no, my friends, and one of them as well in Italy, in the armed forces. First of all, recently they basically said we can't send any equipment to Russia because we need it.
Right.
We actually need it every day.
Oh, and our spare parts come from China and Russia.
Yeah, exactly. So they need the industry in Italy to keep the equipment and the anti-aircraft missiles that they have, which is Italian made, and they need to make it function. And the armed forces are very, very, very much against clown world in Italy. Good. So they are definitely not, they haven't been purged like in Germany. This is why Germany, there's no armed forces anymore.
Right.
Because if you're in a clown world mood, you're not going into the armed forces, at least not to be efficient. You can go there as a government employee and get payroll, but that doesn't make you an efficient armed forces. So yeah, you're right. It could very well precipitate and it could be this year, could be next. But certainly, yeah, we are at the hinge of history for sure. There is some major changes for me in 2022. The biggest news, which is linked to what's happening in Ukraine, of course, was the pivoting of Saudi Arabia towards China. This is, for me, was with hindsight, you could see it happening. You could see it being prepared over the last 5 years, but the fact that they basically chose to say, okay, we'll sell oil and be paid soon into rubles and yuan and so on. Right. It's a major revolution. It's a major change in the world's positioning.
Well, I think potentially the big break in I agree with you. That was a major pivot in 2022. I think the next major pivot could be the breaking of Israel from the Jewish diaspora.
Yes, very good point.
I was talking to the great Martin Van Creveld a couple of years ago, and he made a comment that will sound ironic to any American who's complained about subservience to Israel. He said the neocons will fight to the death of the last Israeli.
Of course.
And so what he was pointing out there is that there's a fundamental divide between the Israeli perspective and the U.S. Jewish perspective, which most people tend to assume is...
At least the ones in Department of State, yeah. Maybe.
Well, yeah,
maybe not
the neo clowns, the ones who are involved with running clown world, and so I think that there's already been some indications that Zelensky was complaining that Israel is being too friendly to Russia.
Oh yeah,
and so I strongly suspect that there's going to be. I mean, I said years ago there's probably going to be a break between the diaspora and the Israelis because their interests are fundamentally separate.
Yes, because Israel actually values life, especially Jewish life, and the way the thing is going is not going to be good for Jewish people living in Europe or in America.
Well, no, because obviously one of the potential additional fronts, if you want to keep the U.S. military occupied, would be Iran and Syria and Lebanon,
which are very near.
Starting
Israel borders.
Yeah, I mean, another Arab-Israeli war is probably not going to turn out the way that they did in the past.
The last one didn't turn out so well. The one of 2006.
Right, because the Israel of today is not the Israel of their grandfathers.
Yeah, and they have their own clown word too.
Precisely, and so I think that for me that's one of the sort of factors, variables to keep an eye on. But the most important thing, and right now the most important man in the world is Xi Jinping.
Sure.
He's the senior partner in the Sino-Russian alliance.
Yes.
And he and Putin are obviously very close, very friendly, in as much as leaders of two nations can be. And so I strongly suspect that they have already made... I think Xi Jinping has already made his decision. Yeah. He's already made his plans. And we're going to begin to see what they are as 2023 carries out.
And as we mentioned last time, and as scholars of history and especially military history, China is an incognita because we don't know what they're capable historically, culturally in terms of war. It's been most Chinese wars are civil wars, and so you cannot really say who's winning in the sense of the tradition of military fighting. And even during the long time ago in the imperial times, most of these civil wars were extremely ruthless, extremely high casualty, and inside the country by definition, not so much outside. So there is no tradition of military adventurism, which is a good thing, by the way.
Yes.
And for people who are against China, and I know few who say they're always negative on China, say, well, at least China is not putting 100 bases in 100 countries across the world. At least they're not, albeit they're starting to have one or two.
But I think that even if you just look at the actual performance of the Chinese military, it's not that bad. They fought the U.S. to a standstill in 1950.
With nothing, with basically sticks and lots of people.
Right. And so if you look at the historical performance of the Chinese military in sort of the post-World War II era, it's not bad. They fought the USA to a standstill in Korea, and they easily defeated the Vietnamese in Cambodia. They drove the Vietnamese out of Cambodia. Some people have this mistaken idea that, they got their nose bloodied and they withdrew. That's not true. They only went into Cambodia because they were to confront the Vietnamese because they were begged to by Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore and a number of the other Asian countries. Those countries have never been concerned about China. They were always concerned about Vietnam.
Sure.
The Vietnamese were considered to be like the Prussians of Asia. And so if you look at their historical performance, even before they got their industrial capacity to the state that it is now, it's not a bad record. And so I think it's a huge, huge mistake to underestimate what the Chinese are capable of doing if they decide to do so.
And as you said, war can take many forms. War can take the forms of biological, can be informational, it can be cyber. It can also be through proxies, and you mentioned I think it's very possible. Having developed a simulation on a possible war in Korea, North Korea has the potential of smashing Seoul in about 24 hours. If only to deny any production capacity of Korea, which is a big product manufacturing country in today's world. And indeed to suck in a lot of American forces,
or even just to tie them up.
Or tie them up, yes. You mentioned Vietnam. Vietnam is a sort of an ally to the U.S. now. It's not really an ally, but it's.
But when push comes to shove, it's not going to side with Clown World.
No,
they're going to side with the Chinese.
No, for sure. So there is a lot of, and so is Philippines. And you mentioned Singapore. I don't see Singapore being very happy with the Clown World approach of things.
Here's the big, and maybe we will close with this. Here's what would be the biggest pivot that I can imagine in 2023. It's not likely, but imagine if Japan changes sides.
That could be interesting, and it's always a possibility, because deep down they don't like the U.S.
They're an occupied nation. Of course, they don't.
It is true. It is true. That's an interesting thought. So we hope for the best, but as I always say, and as we are all doing, we get prepared, we get our mind sharp, we get our tools sharp as well, and we exercise, we do intellectual and physical work, we get ready.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot. It was great to speak to you once again.
Always a pleasure.
Ciao.